Hi, I'm Scott and welcome back to my shop. In this video, I'm going to set up and demonstrate the Vermec Sphere Jig. So keep watching.
Scott's Mini Woodshop is sponsored by you, the viewer. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and thanks for watching.
Turning a perfect sphere on the lathe by hand can be a bit of a challenge. It's going to take some practice, and if you'd like to turn a sphere by hand on your lathe, I have a video showing the steps on how I do that. Let's just say that you want to turn a perfect sphere, you don't have a lot of time to spend practicing turning a perfect sphere, or you want one to be a specific size so you really can't make a mistake. Maybe a sphere jig is something that you want to look into. So this is the sphere jig that's made by Vermec. I bought this jig several years ago because I wanted to turn perfect spheres from some hybrid resin blanks. Now I could have tried doing that by hand, but any mistake that I made, could have really wound up being costly. The wood I was using was expensive, it was burl. The resin itself is very expensive, so to combat all that or to solve that problem, I bought this jig. All right, so let's take a closer look here. This is the Vermec Sphere Jig. Now, Vermec is an Australian company, so you're definitely going to want to check to see where you have a dealer or distributor closer to you, depending on where you live. I bought this years ago, and unfortunately, where I bought it from is no longer in business. But if you contact Vermec, I'm sure they'll be able to give you information on how to get a hold of one of these if you want to get one. But let's take a closer look and see what all these parts are. First up, you can see that this jig is sized for my lathe. So it comes in several different sizes, so make sure if you're going to order one, you order one that fits your lathe, right? And okay, so let's just take a look at this. I have a big lever here, and this is basically going to act as the clamp, just like your clamp on your banjo does, so you can position, okay, and then clamp it down so it won't move. All right, now we got another lever here, okay, and that's going to, clamp this pivot arm. And then we're going to turn and lock that back again. All right, and then we have this upright body here and the swing arm, and this is adjustable. There's a nut underneath of here, and you can loosen up that nut and you can slide it back and forth in this slot. Okay, and then we have a little knob here that will adjust the depth for this cutter. Okay, so that obviously moves in and out, and the cutter itself is it's a Hunter carbide cutter, and it's one of the cup-shaped cutters. So that's what's going on here. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we do have this center finder, right? And this is just a post, okay? And you can see it has a little pointy end on it, right? And as part of the process, when you're making your sphere, you're going to mark the dead center of your sphere. And that just helps you locate it so you can put the jig where it needs to be. And then once you have that lined up, you just move that out of the way. During the setup process, you're going to have to make some adjustments on the jig, and you're only going to have to do it one time unless you move this jig to another lathe. But let's just assume you're going to leave it on the lathe that you have, right? So you set it up one time, and you just want to make sure that the cutter is dead center on the spindle. And all I've done is I've just put a drive center in here with a point, so I could just make sure that my cutter was dead in line with the center of the spindle. Once you have the jig properly set up for your lathe, you should be good to go. So let's throw a piece of wood on the lathe and let's turn a sphere. To make our sphere, I found this piece of scrap oak and I just cut it 3 by 3 by 5. And the reason why I left it a little bit long is I'm going to mount this end in the chuck, and I'm going to want to have some room to cut behind to the back of the sphere and have like a little sprue or a stub left over, because that's where it's going to have to attach, right? I won't be able to cut all the way to the bottom if I made it perfectly square. So, and that'll make more sense as we go, but the first thing is I'm going to have to true this up, get it round, and then put a tenon on this end. You can see I have the piece of wood now mounted in the chuck, and you might notice that it has miraculously changed to a piece of cherry from a piece of red oak. And for full disclosure, I forgot to hit record and had the other piece almost completely done, so had to start over. But yeah, so I got the piece of wood now mounted in the chuck, and it's been trued up, and this surface here has been cleaned up to get rid of the little dimple that was left by the live center. So next up, we're going to have to put some marks on here with the pencil to find the center point for the sphere and the boundaries. With this center finder ruler, you can see that I have about 1 3/8 on either side of the center point. Yeah, the diameter is a little bit smaller since I trued it up. Yeah, we can use the 0 point as the center and measure out on either side. All right, but that's going to give me a little bit of an issue. Okay, because the edge of this is going to come really close to the chuck. You just be careful, and I can mark, just use this edge as 1, so that's 1 3/8, and this is going to be the center. And we go about 1 3/8 over, and this will be the outside edge. So I am not going to turn the lathe on to mark these lines in. I'm actually going to turn this around and do 1 3/8 here. Turn the lathe on, and then mark a line. And then I'm going to go 1 3/8 from that line. And mark a line. All right, that'll give me the boundaries of the sphere, and you know, I could have just put that on there. I just thought it would have been a little bit too risky to have that edge that close to the chuck. I just didn't want it to grab if I slipped or anything. So, okay, so now that we have the boundaries, we got, you know, one side, we got the other side, and we got a center side, or a center line, I'll be able to set up the sphere jig. Before we get this sphere jig on the lathe, I'm going to have to remove this corner. I don't have to. I could actually use the cutter on the sphere jig to do that, but it's just as easy to do it by hand. And I'm going to have to define this boundary, and I'm going to use a parting tool, okay, to just reduce this area here a little bit so I could round over this corner as well. You can see I just took those corners off, and that's just going to give me some clearance for the sphere jig. Now I could actually have used the sphere jig to do all that, but I'd rather beat up on my my spindle gouge instead of beating up on that carbide cutter on the sphere jig. It's just the carbide cutter is, you know, a lot more expensive to replace, and I can always sharpen my spindle gouge. All right, so let's clean up some of this dust off the lathe and get the sphere jig up and ready to go. I have the sphere jig up here on the lathe, and you saw that I had to get the tailstock out of the way. So with the tilt-away, that's really easy. If you don't have a tilt-away or swing-away or anything like that for your lathe, you're definitely going to have to remove the tailstock so you can slide the sphere jig onto the bed of your lathe. I mean, otherwise, you would literally have to unscrew and screw on the plate here on the bottom, and that would really just be a pain in the butt. So, but now that we have this thing up on the lathe, I am going to have to loosen the nut here on the bottom of the jig, okay, and that's actually locked in place by a set screw that's on the back of this post that you can't see from the camera angle. So loosen the set screw, I'll be able to loosen this nut, and then I'll be able to slide this big arm here or post that holds the cutter back further on this pivot arm, okay, and that'll allow me enough maneuverability where I can get this post, okay, this, you know, it's an alignment post, and I can get this to line up, and I'm going to need to get the point of this directly underneath of the line on our sphere. All right, now that I've swung the cutter completely out of the way, I'll be able to raise this post. Okay, and there's an O-ring on here, so it'll stay up here. All right, and let me put my glasses on because I cannot see anything if it's close up. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually lining this up, and sorry, this is a block on my face, until that lines up directly with the line. Okay, and then lock this in place, and now I have the jig centered exactly underneath the center line of the sphere. I switched back to the overhead shot so you can see how I line up this cutter. So let me slide this back closer into where it's going to be cutting. Okay, and I have just hand tighten that bolt down there just so it doesn't move all around, right? And you can see this dial retracts or extends the cutter on the jig. So I'm just going to dial that out a little bit. All right. And I'm going to be able to want to have enough room. So when I finish the jig, okay, it's going to be extended as far as I want it to go. You know, I've used this a few times, so I'm just going to say this is about where I want it to be when it's extended. I'm going to line that up. Okay. Now I could just tighten it like this and it will cut maybe like 3/4 of the sphere. But the problem is going to be is when I come over to this side and I'm swinging it through, all right, because of the angle here, it's not going to want to get in behind, you know, where this big chunk of wood is, right? It's going to be awkward. So to combat that, I am going to tilt this just a little bit, maybe about 11 o'clock if you look at a, you know, consider a clock face here, maybe about 11 o'clock. And I am going to then slide this in till it touches the wood and tighten that up a little bit by hand. All right. And now I'm going to tighten that with the wrench. All right. So let me just do that and we'll kind of see why in just a minute, right? So let's just get that tight. All right. So that's tight. And I'm going to lock that in with the Allen key. All right, so that's locked in. All right, so now if I back this off, okay, and I unlock the swing arm, you can see now I can come in and I can swing into the back of this, all right, and I have clearance all the way around, okay, and I just extend this in, right, you can see I'll be able to extend this in and still cut the center line, right, so that basically tells me that I am going to be able to, you know, cut the sphere to the right size, you know, as big as this piece can be, and still be able to clear, you know, all this mass that we're going to have to take away, right? All right, so here, now it's swinging free, and I'll also be able to get in behind this wood. So I'm going to have to trim some of this away as we go, but I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to do that in a second part, but for now, we're going to work from about where it is here and get this part rounded. All right, so let's get that done. All right, going to take a little bit of a break here midstream, you know, just so you can see what I'm doing, right? So as I have it here where it's not cutting, I'm actually turning the dial to move the cutter in so I can then, you know, work on creating the sphere. And then you can see here where, you know, knocking that a little bit off center, it makes it really easy to access in behind, you know, where this piece of wood is, right? So, you know, where all this mass is. So that works out really well. And I am going to keep doing that until I have this. It's going to be, you know, the better part of like 75 to 80% complete by the time this flat section is gone and it's rounded over. while I was cutting the sphere, you can see, I mean, I could have actually reduced this further, but I didn't want to, because the more mass here was going to equal less vibration when I'm doing the outside. And now that this outside is, you know, completely rounded over, I'm going to bring the tailstock in, and I have a cup center that has an O-ring on it that's going to provide a cushion so I won't mar this up. So let me get that done. You can see I have this cup center. It's just screwed onto the end of my live center. It's got a rubber O-ring on it so it won't mar up the wood. And I have my tailstock locked in place. And now that will support this end, which is, you know, for all intents and purposes, we're done turning it. Okay, now with that supported, I'll be able to remove some of this mass over here and still use the cutter on the sphere jig to, you know, complete that turn, you know, all the way up until I only have like a little bit left. I'm also going to use the tool rest and my spindle gouge to remove some of this wood. All right, so let's get some of that wood out of the way first. All right, let's get this out of the way. But you can see I used that spindle gouge to remove some of that wood, and now that that wood's gone, I'll be able to swing this a little bit deeper, and I might have to do that more than just that one time, you know, probably at least a few, but I'll now be able to swing this in a little bit deeper, and as I go, I'll be able to get deeper and deeper into this area here with the cutter. I was pretty aggressive when I was taking the wood away here until I got close, and then, you know, just very subtle changes in the cutter depth just to, you know, make sure that it was stayed, you know, pretty much consistent and I didn't cut into the surface that was already cut. Okay, and now we haven't changed the center position, so it's going to stay on center. All right, but now I'm going to have to take some more of this mass away, and I'm going to reduce this sprue, or what's going to be this little stub, a little bit further, just to give me more access so I can get in here a little bit deeper with the cutter. All right, so once again, we're going to slide the tailstock into place and switch on the lathe and take some of that wood away with the spindle gouge. All right, so you can see what I was doing there, and I could take this down a little bit further, although to be honest, I don't know that I would want to take it down too much further than that. But it's really up to you how close you want to get this to being, you know, totally cut off. But you're going to have to do some of this, you know, between cup centers to actually round over that stump, right? There's nothing that you really can do to get around that. But here you see we have our sphere, you know, I guess the better part of like, you know, 95% done, right? So I'm going to use a handsaw and I'm going to cut this off, okay? And then we're going to throw some cup centers on the lathe. Well, we have one already, so we're going to put one over here on the headstock end and mount this piece in the cup centers and turn away that sprue. All right, can you see I used that scrap piece of wood that was still on the lathe that was, you know, part of our sphere, and I just made a cup center, and then I hollowed it out, you know, shaped it, rounded over these edges to make it nice and smooth, and I took some 240 and just, you know, polished it up a bit, and that's going to then become like a centering device for the sphere, so I can bring the tailstock up with another cup center and hold it like this. So here you can see the sprue on our sphere, and we have to turn that away. And as I turn the lathe on, you're going to see a shadow for where the sphere's supposed to be and where the sprue actually is. So hopefully we'll turn the lathe on, you'll be able to see that. I don't know if the light is creating a distraction or not, but the light definitely makes it easier for me to see. Okay, but hopefully you can see that shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the tool rest into position. All right. And then cut that sprue away with my spindle gouge. You know, I don't know how well that came out on the video, and I still have a little bit of the sprue left, but it's very little, right? So, and how I'm going to get rid of the rest of that, it's basically going to be like a shear scrape type cut. All right, I'm going to need to adjust the tool rest a little bit, just to raise it up just a touch. All right, and then I'm just going to use that shear scrape on either side just to try to get that to blend in. Okay, so you can see that's mostly blended in, and I can see where it was, but I can't feel where it was. Okay, and all that's going to go away when we sand it anyway, right? So, but there you go. Now we have the sphere done, and next up we should talk about sanding. When it's time to sand the piece, we're going to have to sand all three axes to make sure that the sanding stays even on the sphere. All right, so you're really going to have to come up with a method that you actually can sand all three axes. So like here's one, right? This would be 2, and this would be 3. And for me, what makes sense is I actually have the grain running, you know, parallel to the lathe bed, right? And that's going to be axis number 1 for me. And then from there, I am going to rotate it 90 degrees. So what was hidden underneath of the cup centers then becomes fully exposed, right? So that would be the spot here, right? From here to here, right? And that will make sure I get that evenly sanded. And then the next rotation is going to be perpendicular to the lathe bed. So now I have the grain running perpendicular, okay? And that's going to be the pattern that I do, all right? And to make sure this stays as close to being on center as I can, I'm going to seat it into this cup center and hold it with my hands so it doesn't wobble, and then just slowly engage the tailstock end, right? So that way it's referencing off of the cup center in the headstock, which we just turned. So that should be, you know, dead on. And this is just going to be like a supporting mechanism, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. So let's start this off parallel, and you'll kind of understand what I'm doing as I go, but I'm going to go through this pretty quick, all right, just so I don't bore you with a bunch of sanding, and then we'll come back when I'm done. All right, there you can see I covered all three axes of this piece, and I am going to then rotate this so it's parallel again. And I am going to work through the grits to 320. You can go as high as you want, but I'm going to go to 320, and we'll be back when I'm done. So there you go. We got this sanded down to 320, and you could go to as high a grit as you want, and it looks pretty polished, right? Nice and spherical. And you can put any finish on these that you want. I tend to use Danish oil on a lot of my stuff, and then buff it once the Danish oil has cured. And that leaves a really nice finish for me. But you can finish these however you want. And so there you go. I took some time off camera and I polished this up using some Triple E Ultra Shine It's a polishing abrasive wax, and a cherry sphere came up really nice, right? I even took some time and finished up the one we started originally out of oak. So yeah, it worked out really well. So there you go, a quick look at how to set up and use the Vermec Sphere Jig. And I use that jig all the time for making these you know, Star Wars themed hybrid spheres that I do. So that'll be it for this one. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. You know the usual stuff. You know, like the video, subscribe, share the video, leave me a comment. That'd be awesome. All that stuff helps with the YouTube algorithm and helps my videos to get out to more people. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in Scott's Mini Woodshop. And have a great day.